Hello, Kate. Well, Dr. Kate Lister, thank you ever so much for being part of this digital history festival that we're putting on. I'm so thrilled that you're able to do it, and thank you. And I just wanted to talk to you today about your brilliant new book, Curious History of Sex, which is available in all good bookshops and online, crucially, at the moment.
And online, yes. I'm doing all right, yeah. These are quite mad times that we're living through, right? But yeah, about the same as everybody else, I think. Very happy to be talking to you, to be seeing another human being.
Well, yeah. Here you are. I'm very, very pleased that you can talk to me as well. And I'm very pleased to talk to you too.
My pleasure.
I thought we'd go straight into it. So your book covers loads and loads of different topics, and it's brilliant, and it's written in a really witty way, and I love it. And I've been reading bits of it and then trying to hide the book cover from my 9-year-old daughter, but it's great. But I thought today, if we start off, if you could tell us a little bit about the history of how sex has been linked to food over the years, that might be a good way to get started.
Well, I suppose the most obvious way is there is absolutely a fetish, a paraphilia for people who get aroused by food. To use the vernacular, that's called sploshing. But I don't suppose that's quite what you mean. Sploshing, that one's called. It's when people, they throw like loads of spaghetti sauce and baked beans and stuff all over them and really, really roll around it easily, I've heard, and all that kind of stuff.
You've heard, okay.
I've heard, yeah. That's called sploshing. But I suppose on a more kind of basic psychological level, food and sex are the physical pleasures, right? They're both actually really quite important functionary things that we do. You eat to live, and we have sex for one of the many reasons we have sex is to reproduce and to keep the human race going. If you stop eating food, you will die, and if everyone stops having sex, human beings will die. But it's also about pleasure, isn't it? It's also about a physical pleasure, and it's the two things might not strike you as being really intimately related unless you're a splosher, but okay. But if you think about it, they are like when we talk about sex, or even when we talk about food, actually a lot of the language that we would use to describe either one kind of crosses over. Like you might describe someone as being tasty, or if you're using kind of sort of slang vernacular, you might say that you ate a part of somebody, or you might say that the kind of like the physical taste, in the same way that I've heard good food being referred to as food porn.
That's very true. On Instagram, it's everywhere.
Absolutely, right? And everyone would know what you meant if you said that, oh, that meal was so sexy. They wouldn't actually think that you were aroused. They'd be well aware of what you meant, or you might describe it as like it's a really pleasurable thing to do. It's something really indulgent, and it's something that can also carry a lot of shame around both sex and food if you have too much of it. We have a kind of a strange naughty attitude to both of them. Is that like we know what it is, we know we enjoy it, but there's also, if you have too much of it, if you have too much sex, or if you have too many cherries, chocolate, oranges, or if you mix them all together, that can be a recipe for quite a lot of shame. But yeah, so that they are really connected because they're physical pleasures that we enjoy.
So we've got these iconic foods that we associate with like romance and aphrodisiacs, like oysters and things. Chocolate orange. Mine's chips.
Kebab. Mind you, at the moment in quarantine, just dried pasta and bog roll, right? That's all anybody needs.
Well, right, have you got dried pasta? No. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry.
I'm down to my last loaf of bread. Honestly, there's no food porn here.
I like how you said last loaf of bread, so you've clearly had more than one. That's good.
I had two, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well done.
I'm not guilty about that. I'm on my panic buying with my 2 loaves of bread.
Yeah, well, so how about, if we look to things like not pasta and not chips or Terry's chocolate orange, if we look to like things like oysters, I mean, what's the history behind
Kick it up a notch.
Associated.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. We'll kick it up a notch. Oysters, right? They are the typical food of love. So I suppose the first thing that we should say about them is there isn't actually any scientific evidence whatsoever that they do increase your libido whatsoever. I mean, they're really good for you. They've got basically no calories in, and they're just a powerhouse of zinc and all kinds of great things. But there's nothing to say that they will actually get you in the mood. So the question is, Why is it that they have become iconic, far more sexier than a loaf of bread and some dry pasta? Well, the kind of goes right back to the ancient world. You can trace this. Oysters are actually a really, really ancient food. Oyster shells have been found in Paleolithic sites all over the world. That's how old they are. They go right back. But when you get to the ancient Rome and Greece as well, I think they start to be associated with Aphrodite and Venus. You know, you might remember that famous, is it Botticelli? The image of Venus coming out of the water, and she's not on an oyster.
Yeah.
She's on a, I think it's a clam or something. But it's the association between Venus and shellfish. You see, so it has a link with that. And also everyone's going to just like think I'm a bit strange now, but they do look like a vulva. Everyone's going,
okay,
maybe you should go to a doctor, Kate, when this corona thing is over. But if you actually just go with me, everybody. So they're kind of like there's folds of flesh, and it's soft, and it's kind of yielding, and there's kind of, you know, that kind of, the vulvas have been linked to sort of sea and seafood imagery for as long as time immemorial. I'm sure we've all heard horrendous slang to do with that, but that kind of slightly salty, fleshy, pulpy bit of an oyster has long been associated with a vulva. In fact, oyster has been slang for a vulva since about the 15th century.
Oh, have they really?
Yeah.
So is this across the world, or is this, I mean, where is this slang coming from?
This is I can't speak for any other languages because I haven't studied them, but certainly in English you get references. So you might talk about somebody's succulent oyster or somebody's sexy oyster. I think that Shakespeare does it. He does an oyster pun here or there, but I'm not entirely sure about that one. But it does crop up a lot. A really good source, actually, if you want to look at vulva slang throughout history, there is a slang historian. His name is Jonathan Green, and he has made slang timelines available for free, and he's got one on the penis, he's got one on all kinds of, he's got one on the vulva, so you can actually see when the first reference to oyster as slang for the vulva came up. But that's how intimately associated it is with it. And the Romans, there's no evidence that they thought that they turned you on. It's quite a luxurious food because you'd have to get it in from the sea, so to travel with it meant ice and things like that, so it was decadent. But by the time you get to about the 15th, 16th century, you start getting English physicians like Culpeper saying that it does provoke lechery to oysters. So by that time, it's very much kind of set its seal as this is a food that does provoke lechery. So it's the myth is really old. Yeah.
Well, that's so interesting. Well, thank you for that. A potted history of the oyster and its links to the vulva. Brilliant. That's what we want. And the next thing I wanted to ask you about is the history of menstruation, because that's another area that you cover in your book as well. And obviously, we know as women living in the 21st century that there is stigma attached to it even now. I tweet about having headaches. I'm not sure I would tweet about my PMT. But what is that history? Are there any key moments that you can tell us about?
Well, there was some research done in the 1970s by evolutionary biologists, and I forget the name of them. It's in the book, I promise. I've such a bad memory at the moment in quarantine, but it's in the book. But they did a review of all tribal cultures all over the world, all indigenous peoples, to look for commonalities in belief and folklore. And they found that the one thing that was true amongst almost all people around the globe was menstruation taboo, like a negative attitude to it, a myth around it, that it was somehow dirty or it needed cleansing, or there was some kind of superstition around that. Whether that was like our own culture is where people can just get a bit twitchy and a bit weird about it, and a bit about it, right through to places like in Nepal, where they still use menstrual huts, which the practice has actually been made illegal, but people are still doing it. And that's the practice of that if a girl or a woman is menstruating, you lock her in a hut and you exclude her for the entire duration of her period. And that isn't like it's not like a cool man cave. It's like a proper corrugated iron, just a hut outside. And there have been women that have died in it from the cold or from carbon monoxide fumes in the fires. So that's how dangerous it is. And Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, and all the major religions have got some kind of it being unclean, or some kind of practice around it, that you shouldn't touch a menstruating woman. There was actually still in the British Medical Journal, there was still having an argument about whether or not a menstruating woman would make ham go bad if she touched it in the late 19th century.
Wow.
It doesn't.
Oh,
you can touch all the ham you want. It doesn't. that mad
excuse when I'm cooking, you know. I can't cook any food, I'll make it go bad.
So if it helps that, if it gets somebody off cooking duty, then you fill your boots. But if anyone tries to tell you need to go and sit in a hut for a week, just get in the sea.
I'll remember that. Tip for everyone, don't sit in huts for a week. It's not needed.
No, unless it's some kind of like cool hut that you've made yourself with a bottle of Prosecco, a bar of dairy milk, something on the telly, and then, yeah. But we shouldn't, because it's quite a serious thing. But yeah, interestingly, one of the few exceptions around the world of people that are not really anti-menstruation is a religious sect in southern India called the Bauls, Bauls, the Bauls, and they believe that menstrual blood is sacred. They're a kind of a mix of like tantric and sort of various philosophies, but they believe that people are made of, let me get this right, blood, feces, urine, and I think it's semen as well, I'm not sure, but they think that men are deficient in blood. So when women menstruate, they think that it's like a really important moment for them to be able to ingest that power. And that, so just heads up everybody, this is just, hold on. So, trigger warning, where they literally ingest it. So when a woman is menstruating, they will share the menstrual blood. They will make a drink out of it. It was made with their camphor, milk, spices, and herbs, and they put they collect the blood in a bloody rag, and they'll put it in the drink, and then they'll share it because it's supposed to bring all these amazing healing properties.
Wow, that's really quite something.
That is something. You don't see that on a Tampax advert, do you?
No, I think we should have more of that on our Tampax adverts.
I'm all for that. I mean, that is quite an extreme thing, but they also think that men should have sex with women when they're menstruating and get as much splatter going on as they possibly can, because that will help revive his lagging blood energies. I'm fully on Team Ball. I think this is a brilliant idea. It sounds
interesting for sure.
Better than sitting in a hut though, right?
I think so. But then one of the things that I always used to think about before I became a historian and learned these things myself is how did people cope with periods in the past before we had Tampax, before we had tampons? What did people do? So I wonder if you could tell a little bit about that history.
Yep. So question is, I mean, this is one of those very unrecorded histories because women just didn't, like, firstly, only very elite women usually could write and would have the means to write things down. So finding first-hand accounts of having your period, a kind of a medieval, are you there, God, it's me, Margaret, would just be amazing, but it's not there. So I suppose it's more like you kind of have to think, well, what would you do now? You know, we're in quarantine. What if you didn't have any tampons or things like that? Well, you might use rags, you might use straw, you might just free bleed, which is obviously what a lot of women would have done. They would have just bled into their clothes. We have to think as well is that it's sort of a lot of places is they wouldn't have been particularly well nourished. So there is some research that suggests that perhaps fertility levels wouldn't have been particularly great, which might mean that they didn't menstruate as frequently, but that's quite speculative. But I suppose if you were poor, you would probably just clamp rags between your legs, or you would just bleed into your clothes is what you would do. If you were rich, you would you'd make a pad, basically, is what you'd do, just kind of like out of a rag, almost like a Terry's nappy type of a thing, and you would make that and you would hold that kind of in between your legs is what you do. And by the time you get to the 19th century, that's when you start to get the kind of more like pads that you would recognize today that were fixed with a belt around the middle, and they kind of tied to keep it between your legs.
Yeah, gosh, it makes you glad that we're living today. no.
Yeah.
So I keep rubbing my eye. One of the awful things about coronavirus being out this time of the year is that it coincides with hay fever. So I'm kind of rubbing my eyes and I'm thinking, do I have it? Do I have it? And you know, I'm sure it's just hay fever. Anyway, that's a complete and utter aside. My next question to you is: has it ever been acceptable in society to talk freely about sex?
It's a difficult question to answer, that one. There are definitely societies where sex was clearly much less tabooed than it is now, and you can see evidence for that. For example, if you're looking at ancient Rome, if you've ever been to the city of Pompeii, destroyed by Vesuvius in 79 AD, even looking around at the wreckage of that town, you can see that this is somewhere where people had a radically different attitude to sex than the one we do today. For a start off, there are dicks everywhere. Like there are phalluses on the floor, there are phallus sculptures on the wall. If you go into what would have been family homes, there are these incredible erotic frescoes all over the walls. Like, and imagine just having a family dinner of a Sunday and just having a load of porn on the walls. It's absolutely fine, this. And there are brothels all over the place, but brothels very much mixed in with what were residential areas as well. So the people aren't there to tell us exactly what they thought of it, but even just looking at the geography of how this is laid out, you can tell this is a place where it isn't taboo to talk about these things. I know that, you know, in a few thousand years, people might look at us and think that there are dicks everywhere because we can't help ourselves drawing cock and balls all over the place. But that's slightly different than if, let's say, the council where you lived just decided to draw dicks in the road, you know, officially as you're going along. So but what they would have wanted to talk about is, we're not quite sure. And that doesn't mean that they didn't have taboos. It doesn't mean that they didn't have very strict rules and regulations that they imposed themselves. We mustn't think of them as being some kind of sexual utopia, because very much for wives, a lot of the time, it was shut up and put up. You were there to make babies, and they had a really strict cult of virginity around women and quite shitty attitudes to women's sexuality. And of course, mass spread what we now recognise as paedophilia that was actually encouraged, this idea that an older man would take a young youth as his apprentice, but that was fully expected to be sexual. But they clearly had a much more open dialogue around sex than we do today, and you can see that evidence from all over the place. But I actually think that probably today we're the closest that we've got to having a sexually liberated society, and I say that in the full knowledge that, yeah, really bad stuff happens all over the world. People still execute for their sexuality. There's still so much shame that goes on into it. But if you look at, like, it's especially in our culture where we are now, I don't think we've ever been this tolerant and permissive around people's sexuality or willing to talk about it. I mean, look at you and me having a chat about dicks of Tuesday evening, you know, and then
it's Thursday. Oh no, it's Wednesday. It's Wednesday. Oh my god.
It's a day. Oh
no, it's not. It's actually Friday, because this is it's Wednesday.
It's just a day. It's like a weird Christmas, right? It's just all the days have lost all meaning. But whatever day it is, like you and me are sat here having a chat about penises and menstrual blood and having sex on your period and bread and oysters and all those things. I mean, I'm sure Victorian women spoke about that as well, but I've yet to find them doing it in quite such a public and accessible way where it isn't pornography. There's plenty of examples of pornography where it's two women chatting together. But
yeah.
So I think that probably now we're the closest that we've come to it.
Well, that's good. That's encouraging. It's encouraging for the next generation.
Yeah, you know,
the one after
continue
that.
the work, right? Continue.
Yeah.
Let's keep moving forward and get it to a place where we're calling out shame and stigma around sex all the time. Yeah.
So my final question for you before I leave you to your busy quarantine is, what's your best historical anecdote that you can share with us?
Oh, I don't know. Oh, do you know, I do like the fact that the word fuck didn't always mean what it means today. The word that was originally used from the early medieval period was swive. So you would swive as and you'd use that in exactly the same way that you'd use fuck. You'd say, I swived her brains out, I swived his brains out. But the word fuck actually meant to strike, to hit something. That's its original meaning. So you'd fuck something, you'd hit it. And it actually appears in a lot of medieval people's names. In the 13th century, there was a dairy farmer called Simon Fuckbutter. I'm such a child. You think it still makes me laugh. Yeah, his name's Simon Fuckbutter because he would like literally hit the butter to make it. I love that. I think that's the best name ever. Simon.
Wow.
Fuckbutter.
Well, that's taking food and sex to a whole new level, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, maybe, I'm saying this. Maybe Simon really did fuck butter.
You never know. You never know. Simons are always troublesome specimens.
I found that as well, actually. But yeah, that's one of my favourite historical anecdotes. There was a Simon Fuckbutter.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for your time, Kate. And just once again, your brilliant new book is called A Curious History of Sex, and you really should buy it because it's brilliant, and I'm having lots of fun reading it in secret. But thank you.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure. Have a lovely apocalypse.